Hi, I'm Buhle
And I'm Gershwell Brooks.
Welcome to episode 1 of our video podcast series. We don't have a name for it yet, so please help us title the series. But for the first episode, Gersh?
We have none other than the interim federal leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen himself.
That needed a drum roll. We're looking forward to this chat. Do join us.
As Gushwell has just said, this is our first venture. We're very happy to have you on. We don't know what the name of this slow YouTube podcast series is as yet, so we'll find out. But we're very pleased to have you and welcome to it.
Good. I'm glad to be your first victim.
I think just as a starting point, maybe if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where does John Steenhuisen come from? Who is he? Where did he go to school? What informed him to pursue a career in politics?
So I'm from Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. I spent for the first 30 years of my life in Durban, in KZN. I grew up in Durban North, which was a very strong Progressive Federal Party stronghold and Democratic Party stronghold in KZN, and was one of the few constituencies in the 80s that sent PFP MPs to Parliament. So I grew up in that environment in Durban North. I went to school there. I did finish matric at Northwood Boys High School. Contrary to what you may read on Twitter, I have my matric, and very proud old boy of Northwood Boys High School. The age of 22, I had been a member of the DP and then was a member of the branch. I became the activist, a branch chairperson, and then our councillor got elected to the legislature in KwaZulu-Natal, and one of the other branch members said, well, why don't you stand for office? And I said, well, I'm 22 years old. How am I going to get elected? But I'll give it a shot. And I gave it a shot. I've always been attracted to politics because I think it is the one place that you can really make a difference and change can happen, contrary to what many people believe. Politics can be the art of achieving the impossible if you put your mind to it. And I've always had a very strong sense of public service from school days right the way through. I've been involved in Rotary, community-based organizations, etc. So I suppose it was a natural segue into politics. And it's the political processes that have always fascinated me. It's an interest I've had my entire life. I'm a huge consumer of political biographies, and I always have been. And I really, like studying and using politics as a means to progressive change in a society, and an incredible tool it can be to make a difference.
Now, you'd have grown up in the apartheid era, so you'd have seen a lot of the injustices that happened. When did you realize that this is something that you want to get involved in, and when do you want to take it? And when did you realize that you want to take it somewhere as well?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky. I grew up in quite a progressive community. It certainly wasn't a National Party stronghold or anything. And I attended a school, and right from my standard 6-year or Form 2 year, we had black pupils in our class at Northwood Boys High School. I was at school with a guy called Simpiwe Paliso. There weren't a lot of black students, but it was then that we started to question, but hang on, why are there so few black students? And then there was influence a lot from some really progressive history teachers, ironically. Someone like Claire Dyer at the school, people like Lionel Botha at the school, who really started to get us thinking about what was going on in the country at the time. Bear in mind, this was, I started my high school year in 1990, so it was pretty much after 89. And they started sharing stuff around, written by Lily Kalinikos. Foundations of a New South Africa started to become out as books that we were being taught with. And then probably, and it's one of the moments I'll never forget, probably, was around, I think it was about 1991 or 92, one of the history teachers took us up in the history class to watch the movie Cry Freedom, which was around the struggle around Steve Biko and the injustice and the escape of Donald Woods, etc., out of the country. And that really pricked my conscience then, and it's that got me interested in the Democratic Party, and so I started helping out at a local level with the DP. in the community, and sort of took it from there. But I mean, if I remember back, that was the first time that we started to realize there was a deep injustice around what was going on, and that it wasn't normal for there to be racial segregation and for there to be so few people of color in a public school, and just the injustice of what was going on in the country. But things were moving pretty fast there. The early 90s, mid-90s started to gather pace as we headed into 93, 94. And so, I mean, by the time I'd left school in 1993, it was a year before our first democratic elections. And it was certainly, politics was the buzzword. There was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of insecurity, but also I think a lot of hope that things were going to really change for the better. And there was I can always remember that sort of crackle in the air where you never knew what was going to happen, but you knew something was going to happen. And being able to be an experience that was incredible.
I just want to take a step back, and you made mention of it. The hullabaloo that was created on social media around your academic background, whether you went to university, whether you finished matric, etc., etc. And I mean, it became a massive debate, and I think to some extent, for me personally, it became a bit of a red herring. What's your take on the whole notion of finding yourself in politics, in a senior position in politics, especially like yourself, in a senior position within your party, but not having, a formal tertiary education? I mean, does it make a difference at all? Because it's one of the big things that we keep on going on about in this country that leads to a lack of governance, in essence, not having experts, so to speak, in their field of office.
Sure. So I think you need to differentiate between sort of professional public service and public servants, who are the technocrats, and politicians, or the policymakers, and the requirements for the different requirements for both jobs. The Constitution sets out the requirements for the political policy making legislative space. The Public Service Act sets out the requirements there. I finished matric in 1993 with a matric exemption. I enrolled at UNISA and I started at Varsity College, and I studied politics and up to third year level, international politics and African politics. And I received many distinctions for many of the subjects that I took up. Unfortunately, by that time, I'd got involved in politics. I had started to my life. I got married, and bought a house, etc. And of course, the imperative was to start earning a living. So I started working, and it just didn't become. It became very difficult for me to fund my study while trying to pay off a house, a bond, and cars, and etc. etc. And also, just from a time perspective, I was essentially working two jobs. I was doing sales and marketing in the day, and then doing my politics at night. And it just crowded out my studies, and I regret it. I wish I had just pushed through that extra year and finished, because it really has become a real red herring. But I will tell you this. There's not one thing I learned in any of the modules I studied in African politics, international politics, or politics that has any bearing or influence on what politics is really like and the skill set that's required. And, I use someone like the EFF's, some of the EFF MPs in Parliament, who are, from KwaZulu-Natal, and who are actually some of the most formidable public representatives, even though they don't have any formal schooling whatsoever. And, politics is not about academics. I've met academics who make the worst politicians, and I've met, the other end of the spectrum. I think it's about being able to lead, and lead with integrity. I don't think you need to have a degree to do that. A degree doesn't protect you or insulate the public from politicians who will get involved in corruption and maladministration. So I may not be capped, but I also haven't been convicted, and I think that's a good.
Yeah, I think that's a bit better, actually. In terms of the political landscape of South Africa, I'm pretty sure you agree that it's like no other. How do you see the DA navigating such a difficult space in politics?
Look, I mean, we had a really bad year last year, and it happens. The election cycles come and go, and you have good elections and bad elections. I think we had a good run from '94. We grew in every election. Last year was a stall for us, and these things they don't have to be fatal if you stop, realize where you went wrong, and start to set about fixing it. So we embarked upon a process of an internal review. I think it was a very brave process. And certainly unprecedented in the South African political scene, where a party takes such a hard, honest look at what went wrong and where it messed up, why it lost support, why it failed to attract new support, and then we published it publicly. I mean, I don't think there's any party in the country that's been as honest about its failings as we were. And now we've set about in the process of fixing what was wrong and getting the party back on course. I think part of the party's problem was that it really started to stand for nothing and everything, and became a weather vane rather than a road sign to the future. So when South Africans looked at the DA, they didn't really know what direction it was going, and it was being buffeted by the political winds. And what people want in politics is to know where you stand, and for you to be clear and unambiguous about what your hopes and aspirations are for them and for the future of the country, rather than being blown around by the political winds. And I think if you look at the last election, the parties that did the best were parties that were completely unambiguous and completely clear and upfront about what their message was. On the left, you had the EFF, and it didn't matter whether you were in Polokwane or Pietermaritzburg. When you saw their poster, you knew this was a party of the left fighting for land and jobs. On the opposite end of the spectrum, whether you were in Potchefstroom or in Tshwane, it didn't. You saw a Freedom Front poster. You knew that they were a party for fighting back for minority rights. And there was the DA in the middle, trying to be all things to all people. And when there's an old saying in politics: if you stand in the middle of the road, you're going to get knocked over. And I think we got knocked over quite badly in the 2019 election. And I think voters want to see us being more clear and unambiguous about what we want for South Africa. I also think that the DA spent far too much time in the last decade playing on the ANC's pitch and not setting out our own offer to South Africans. And I think it's a fair criticism of the commentariat, saying, well, you're in an environment with such rampant corruption and government failure, why are you not doing better? And I think part of the reason why that criticism is valid and fair, and why we need to adjust our approach to do it, is that I think we've done precisely that. We've spent so much time in the ANC shop telling the customers in the shop that the food is rotten, they rip you off at the till, and the owners are nice people. I think what people want is for us to open our own shop and set out our own products and invite people to engage on those. And I think that's certainly where I would like the DA to be playing far more, and certainly where we've been pitching and experimenting during this COVID crisis by being solutions-oriented, not just responding to the ANC all the time, but setting out our own plans, our own suggestions, our own offer to South Africans. And I think it's if we can do that and drive issues that matter to people, that matter to people, not to politicians, I think that we're going to be able to not only recover some of the support we lost, but also break into new ground of voters who are going to be in a very difficult position by the time the election rolls around. Full-blown economic depression, potential 51% unemployment rate, and 47% of households that are food insecure. That's a terrible environment for a government, and an opposition party that cannot capitalize on that, I think will have to be asked some serious questions on after that election.
I'd actually maybe take a step back again and just look at what you had stated there. I mean, if you look at the state of the country at this point in time, I think it's pretty obvious that we're in a state of crisis, but it's then easy to default and say that, well, we're in the midst of a global COVID-19 pandemic. That's what led to the economic slowdown, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why I'm saying I'm taking a step back is because, again, we're going to look at the current governance structure that we have. And all I'm just simply asking is, what is your assessment of the state of South Africa at this point? And I think for many people out there, people would be watching this interview eventually and listening to this discussion, they would wonder, is South Africa still worth it? Do we still have a country worth fighting for? And what do you think is ultimately the foundation or the key pillars to the problems that we have in South Africa at this stage?
Sure. So I think we need to be honest as a country, because part of dealing with problems is having an honest assessment of why we are in the crisis that we're in. And we must accept that we were very low in the water long before COVID was even a word that was known to anybody. We've had 6 years of technical recession where our GDP growth has been outstripped by population growth. We were in a full-blown recession for 2 quarters, which it shows that the economy was in deep trouble. In 2019, our economy grew at just 0.2%. Now, if you compare that with our neighbors in sub-Saharan Africa alone, shows you just what a bad situation we're in. 10 million South Africans unemployed. So we were very low in the water going into this crisis. COVID has broken like a wave over. And I think we've got to ask ourselves the question, why was that? And it can only be at the paradigm of policy and decision-making that led us into that situation. And what worries me is that the solution coming up from the governing party is basically to double down on the very policies that got us into the mess in the first place, that made sure we were low in the water and made sure that when South Africans needed a government that was able to open the larder in a time of crisis to feed the nation, it had been eaten away by the rats and mice of state capture and corruption. But I think there's a paradigm shift that's required in South Africa. I think the last focus, the last 20 years, has been on building this huge state apparatus and giving more and more power to the state and taking slowly but surely power away from people, investing it in the state. I think we've got to break that paradigm if we're going to get off this terrible trajectory that we're on. We've got to move to a paradigm that gives power to people and takes it away from the incapable state. You know, when you built the state up to be this huge machine and you've got all these state-owned entities, you've got everything centralized with collective bargaining, you make small businesses part of decisions that they were never sitting around the table with. You give unions, massive power over key areas of the levers of growth in the country, and you crowd out private enterprise and the public and people power. Investors said you create an environment where it is essential to capture the state because then you have full control. I think if we dissolve and devolve state power more effectively to the people and trust South Africans, I think that we'll be able to change the paradigm and get South Africa moving. So break up these state-owned monopolies, break up the power of the state, take power away from politicians and give it to people, and allow public enterprise and business to partner with government in the growth agenda. When I read Enoch Gondongwana's document, and I read it very thoroughly, I think it's a very good analysis of what the problem is, but the remedy is the same medicine that's been given to us for the last 2 decades, that has led to a 10% decline in incomes in black households. It's led to 30 million people living in poverty, and that is, well, all we need to fix the problem is just a little bit more state power. Just bail out the state-owned entities again, and I'm sure we'll be able to revive the state-owned airline out of the ashes of the old failed state-owned airline. Let's push money back into Eskom. That's the wrong approach. What we should be doing is opening up greenfield industries in these key areas that will be able to stimulate job creation and get the state out of the way of trying to do everything. Rather let the state focus on what it must do and let it do it well and efficiently, and open up space for citizen power and personal power in South Africa, and people power, and trust people to be able to help grow the economy. I think if we can change that paradigm, I think we'll be able to get South Africa onto a growth trajectory. But what it is going to require is to build a new majority in South Africa to get these reforms through. It's very clear those reforms, unfortunately, are not going to be possible in the current political environment. And certainly the president's power to drive that reform agenda, I think, has dwindled dramatically. And that window of opportunity that he had is rapidly closing.
As a follow-up to that question, obviously South Africa has a very unique set of circumstances. Not necessarily all that unique, because I guess it's what happened globally. Colonialism, followed by some form of racial segregation. And racial segregation that didn't just strip people of civil and political rights, but also socioeconomic rights. And let's be honest, our colonialism / apartheid / racial segregation ended very late in South Africa compared to the rest of the world. Anywhere in the world, civil political rights are generally restored first, even the UN followed that model, followed then by socioeconomic rights. So ultimately, the state has some form of responsibility in trying to establish equity. So how does the state, based on what you just said, then manage to restore that sense of equity while simultaneously stepping back and saying it's up to people to take back their own power?
So two important things. Anyone who says to you that race doesn't matter in South Africa is frankly not bounded in reality. Race is a huge factor in South Africa, and it is a factor for precisely the reasons you've spoken about. We've had centuries of legislative dispossession and marginalization of people based on nothing other than the color of their skin and the circumstances of their birth. And it has been, and there's been political marginalization and exclusion. There's been economic marginalization and exclusion. There's been geographic marginalization and exclusion. And we've got to address those problems, because if we don't, and if we don't get serious about addressing this huge problem of inequality in South Africa, it opens up a huge potential market for the radical left to come in with populist policies, which I think would end up being disastrous for the country and would take it backwards. But where I think government has missed a trick, and this is one of the sad things, that there are many government programs that are very noble that have not achieved their outcomes. One amongst these is BBBEE, which has created a very small group of South Africans who are very wealthy, black South Africans are very wealthy. But the truth of the matter, as we sit in this interview today, there are 30 million South Africans who languish below the poverty line, the international recognition of poverty, 97% of whom are black. And I think that those are the people that need the genuine empowerment and need to be included in the economy. So we've got to build an inclusive economy. But what underpins an inclusive economy has to be a capable state, because only then are the interventions that you put in place able to achieve their goals. So let's just look what's happened with an incapable state in this coronavirus crisis. You've got two agencies who really essentially have one job only. SASSA, their job is to help the most vulnerable in South Africa who are in difficult conditions. They've been a complete abject failure in this crisis, despite the fact they had one job, because they are incapable of being able to roll out grants and assistance where they need it. There's still people waiting for their grants, the 350 Rand, etc. The UIF is another example. They have one job, and that's to help tide South Africans over a difficult period, and South Africans have been contributing for many, many years into a fund. There are many people who are sitting now 4 months into this crisis who are yet to receive a single UIF statement. So even when you have the most nobly intended policies, if they are not backed up by a capable state that's able to deliver them, you're on a hiding to nothing. And in an ordinary sense, it's very dangerous. In a pandemic situation, it's deadly. And you're seeing it, the incapable state at play everywhere. Public hospitals, people fighting over oxygen cylinders, people having rats and mice scurrying around under hospital beds. This is all and we're never going to address the inequality in South Africa if we don't build a capable state that focuses on doing what it must do and doing it well, opening up access to the economy for the 30 million people who are unemployed, rather than just re-empowering the same group of people over and over again who become fabulously wealthy, but our inequality gap keeps rolling on. So we need genuine empowerment policies focused on lifting poor South Africans out of poverty and into opportunity, and being able to allow them to participate in the economy. That is not possible with policies that get abused for closed cronyism, and we've seen it again in this crisis with the PPE scandal. And what the worst part is, it's the same names that are popping up in this scandal that were around in the state capture scandal. It's the Magashules, it's the Mokonyanas, it's Andile Ramaphosa's. It's the same people who are now popping up again in this crisis. So when they absorb opportunity, they lock out the 30 million South Africans who we need to desperately lift out of that poverty situation into opportunity through meaningful empowerment processes that open up the space for them to be able to participate.
You speak of the 30 million South Africans, and obviously majority of them would be black South Africans. The thing with South Africans, and I'm sure you'll be aware of this, is that they vote for political parties that they associate with and that they can recognize themselves Now, if you look at the DA, a lot has been said about the higher ranks and the representation within the higher ranks of the DA. What do you make of that, and how would you urge South Africans to look past that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that, first of all, I'd like to say the DA, I believe, is the most diverse party in the political spectrum. If you look at our opponents on both the left and right of us, they are virtually monochromatic. The Democratic Alliance's federal executive, which is the highest decision-making body in the party, is majority Black South Africans. Our federal council is the same. And, our two national spokespersons are Black. Our key main spokespersons and key portfolios like health, etc., are Black South Africans. 8 of our 9 provincial leaders are Black South Africans. So I think when somebody looks at the DA in its totality, or the people and team around the leader, there's something of all South Africans represented in there. The same can't be said of the Freedom Front. The same can't be said of the EFF. In fact, the same is increasingly unable to be said of even the ANC. The DA's got to diversify and diversify in its leadership far more. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. Are we well on our way? I believe so. And programs like our Young Leaders program like our Potential Candidates program, our in-service training activists, and growing our own timber is starting to really yield results. And some of the products of those programs are now playing key prominent roles within the party. But here's the thing. As I said to you earlier in the conversation, race matters, and of course it does. And I'm not under no illusion that as a white South African, I've got a mountain to climb to show poor Black South Africans that they have no better champion for their cause and in their corner than me. And I really do think that going into the local government elections is opportunity for the DA, regardless of who the leader elected in October is, mainly because the country is going to be in such a difficult position. There's very few governments in the world that have survived through a middle-class depression, and we're about to go into a depression, going to wipe out around about 10% of our GDP. So I spoke to you already about 51% unemployment, and it's going to hit the middle class. They're going to lose their jobs, lose their businesses, lose their homes, lose their cars, be unable to provide for their families. And I think going into this next election, there's 2 key critical questions that voters across the spectrum are going to be asking. One, who do I trust to get my local economy working so I've got a chance to get a job and open up some opportunity for myself? And second, who do I trust to deliver basic services in a cost-effective, efficient way so that I can live with dignity? And I think if the answer on the tip of the tongue of voters to that question is not the DA, then we would have failed in our mission. Because we have a great track record where we govern of doing that. It is what we focus on, good, clean, accountable government that delivers services. And I think that many, many South Africans are going to be in such a desperate situation that I don't think they're going to be caring what the color of the cat is, as long as it's going to catch the mouse, to quote the former Chinese premier. And also in a local government election, I'm not going to be on the ballot paper. I mean, that's I'm not the mayoral candidate. That's who's going to be on your ballot paper, your local council. And I think what we're going to be able to do in that election is show the full gamut of diversity within the DA. And it's going to be represented in our candidates, our mayoral candidates, and people that we're putting forward. And I think that there's huge opportunity for us in this next election if we do those things I spoke about earlier. Focus on our own product, showing South Africans an alternative vision for South Africa, setting out what that vision is, and then showing the journey there and painting it in spectacular technicolor, not shining a light down into the hole to tell South Africans how deep it is, but shining a light out of the hole to show everybody how we can get out of the situation. I think there's huge potential for the DA going forward, particularly amongst those voters who have borne the brunt of the 6 years of technical recession and are now going to have life turning a lot harder in a full-blown economic depression.
Can we talk a little bit about the governance aspect then? And I mean, as you had mentioned, there's already a track record in place. I mean, the Democratic Alliance had arguably three of the most important metros, to boast about as being part of its governance structure. Tshwane, Johannesburg, as well as, of course, Cape Town. Now, Cape Town, you've managed to hold on. Joburg, you've lost. Tshwane is still up for grabs. I think I'm not too sure what the eventual outcome was in Tshwane, but I mean, from that perspective alone, how is one able to turn around? I mean, taking Cape Town, setting Cape Town aside, because I guess we can have a conversation about the Western Cape / Cape Town, in isolation. But looking at Tshwane and at Johannesburg, what were the issues ultimately that led to either the Democratic Alliance being left holding on for dear life by mere, fingertips, alternatively losing the metro altogether? Because ultimately, as a voter, one then looks at it and says, but hang on, what is the governance track record? Is it a good governance track record? Or what does it say when you lose voters or when you lose those particular cities?
Look, I mean, I think it's a difficult situation, and we must remember that in both those municipalities, we're essentially running minority governments and relying on an informal coalition arrangement with the EFF, and they've got their own values and principles, and I think that in many instances they're diametrically opposed to us. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, and the rearview mirror is always clearer than the windshield. I think we took on too much. I think we never expected to govern in Johannesburg and Tshwane. We always knew Nelson Mandela Bay was the one where we had the best shot, and it was a real surprise to us when we were able to form minority governments in Joburg and Tshwane. In hindsight, I think we should have only taken one of them and focused on really every bit of the party's resources on making it work. Because we were able to achieve results in both those municipalities, but obviously not as quick as you would like and not as publicly as you would like. So a lot of the underground infrastructure in Joburg was the focus, fixing cabling, electricity substations, etc., where the focus was on. In Tshwane, we were able to turn the municipal finances around to be able to roll out a variety of projects within the city. In Joburg, job centers created, being able to start to clean up in the inner city. But ultimately, it's very difficult to govern in a coalition as tenuous as those ones were. And we've been to school now on coalitions, and we've learned some very tough lessons that are going to guide us going forward. First of all, you can't run a coalition without a formal coalition agreement. You've got to get everybody at the beginning of the process pinned down to what are the key objectives that we want to achieve in the next 5 years, and you need to get everyone to commit to a fixed term. It's impossible to govern when you're living from council meeting to council meeting. It causes a state of huge flux in the municipality, and it makes it very, very difficult to actually govern. What you want to be able to do is to have your hand on the steering wheel and be able to go full throttle. In a coalition, it's a lot more difficult. You've got to manage a variety of hands on the steering wheel, all with their own ideas about direction, etc., and it causes some issues. I also think we made some errors. I mean, I don't think we are innocent as a party in this. I think Nelson Mandela Bay was a good example of a coalition that was relatively stable, and I think it came down to managing personalities there. At the end of the day, that unfortunately led to the situation. That government should never have fallen in Nelson Mandela Bay. And we've learned a lot of lessons that, even though you may be the party that's got the 42%, the party that's got the 1% often might as well have 51% because you need them. So I think that we've learned some lessons in terms of coalition management going forward as well, about how you would manage this. Definitely no coalitions without a fixed coalition agreement against which you can hold your partners. Because the worst thing you want to be doing is what's happened in places like Joburg, is starting a campaign of clean governments, clean accountable governments, and then you've got one of the coalition partners in the Johannesburg Roads Agency, dipping into tenders, and you've got the, one of the other people you rely on to get votes for that are holding you over the barrel to get tenders in fleet contracts, for instance. And, it obviously compromises then your brand and your ability. So no more coalitions without fixed coalition agreements, preferably fixed term agreements. Say that for the next 3 years, this is what we're going to focus on, and you hold everybody to that. And then about managing personalities. We can't let personalities get in the way of good governance. And I think Nelson Mandela Bay for us was a very good example of that.
I mean, you speak of the fact that, you might have gone too big too soon when you had Tshwane as well as Johannesburg. Now, let's say in a world where the DA gets elected to govern the country, would it not be too big for sure?
No, I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. And it's a misalignment in our political system. Local government is probably the most important sphere of government, and I've served at all three. It is the hardest job I've ever had being a councillor, and I can tell you if we're going to change this country, it's going to change at local government level first. That's where it's got to start. What happens is with this sort of seniority of Parliament, MPs and MPLs, who earn more than councillors, who get more benefits than councillors, etc. Often what you have is councillors now wanting to transition into Parliament because that's where there's a better prospect for them and there's better opportunities and there's better profile, and the work's nowhere near as hard as it is at the local government level. So what you end up with is really excellent people sitting in the mid-bench of Parliament, when in fact your very best people should actually be in local government level, because that's where we're going to turn the country around. National government, provincial government's like a super tanker. You can make a radical turn, but it's going to take years to see the change and the difference. Local government's like a canoe. You can make a change tomorrow in a municipality that can have a profound impact on a local economy, a housing project, a way to be able to deliver. And so I think that what we have to do is start to fight for greater equity between the three spheres of government. And I think that parties need to start managing the process that you keep really capable, good people in local government and not necessarily focus on it. So we've got some excellent people at national government, the national parliament, who are brilliant. I mean, I think of someone like Saviwe Gwarube, who's done such an incredible job in this crisis, in terms of the health portfolio. I think of someone like Pumzile van Dam, and who's done excellent work in the SABC and in the communication space. And there's so many of those stories. Leon Schreiber in the Public Service Administration, Dean McPherson, Trade and Industry, has been really going hard after making sure businesses survive. These are the type of people that I think will be able to contribute tremendously to government. And it is really a pity for me. We made an offer at the beginning of the crisis. I made every one of my shadow ministers write to their counterpart and say, hey, we're here. How can we help? Draft us in. If you want us to sit in meetings or give us work to do, we'll do it. It's a pity none of the government ministers took up the offer, because I think they would have had some really bright people assisting them to navigate the department and their function through a difficult crisis. And it's really a pity that didn't take place. I think we'd be able to manage, but let's be realistic. The DA is not going to get 51% of the next election. It's not possible. And any leader of this party that sits and tells you that, I think you need to take with a truckload of salt. We're not going to wake up in 2024 with a 51% majority for the DA. And that's not the mission that I've put this party on. I've put the party on a mission of being a core or a large part of a new majority in South Africa by 2024. And, so I think bringing together good South Africans that exist in all political parties, are excellent people in all political parties. And I think being able to bring them together to build a new majority and to form a government of all the talents, I think would be exactly the medicine that we'd need to get the reform agenda passed.
You made a very interesting concession saying that, look, 2024 is not going to see the Democratic Alliance getting the 50 plus 1%, and then being the majority party governing this country with you being president, presumably, assuming that you win the first battle being the leadership battle for the DA. But the key question that I then have is then what is the value proposition coming through from the Democratic Alliance? Because for the voter listening to this very conversation right now, the obvious question is, why do I have to bother? Why do I have to be concerned with a party that doesn't see itself in that governing position, a party that ultimately then takes the lead, with their key candidate as the president, them being able to constitute their own cabinet and executive, and being able to take the reins of this country? What is your value proposition then?
Well, I think that it's important to know, I mean, we can have fantasy leagues for our sport teams, etc., and the like, but, and you can have fantasy leagues in politics, but the real politics shows us that, and the numbers are there to see, that it's unlikely that certainly by 2024 that the DA will have a 51% majority. I'm not necessarily ruling that out in election cycles after that. But what I am saying is that the value proposition is this, that what you want at the center, the rational center of South African politics, is a party with a big enough pile of chips to be able to put on the table when the ANC drops below 50%, to be able to start looking at building a coalition or a new majority that's going to be able to drive a reform agenda. So I happen to think, and I said it many, many times on the campaign trail, that the best gift voters could have given Cyril Ramaphosa in the last election was a stronger DA, because, you know, where there's many aspects of the president's reform agenda, and certainly the stuff that they've put on paper, Minister Mbaweni's document, which we agree, and I've said to the president, bring it to the floor of parliament, you'll have our 85 votes, we'll help you get it through. And I think that's where the development has to be, around the new rational center of South African politics. And as I said earlier, there are really good people in all parties. And I think it's about deciding once and for all, let's forget about the ideologies, let's forget about the petty divisions. Let's acknowledge the Berlin Wall fell many years ago. Leonid Brezhnev's not in the Kremlin. You know, there's no Cold War underway. And let's leave that stuff behind us. Let's focus on the 10 to 15 things that we know we need to do now to get South Africa off this low growth, high debt, high unemployment trajectory and onto a new trajectory of hope and prosperity for South Africans. And we don't have to agree on everything, but let's stick to a program. Say for the next decade, these are the 10 to 15 things that we are going to do to get the country back on track. And then to get South Africans to coalesce around that plan from various parties. And of course, there's going to be some parties who say, well, we don't want to be part of that. But I really do believe that is the only future for South Africa, because the alternative is that a coalition on the far left starts to form that pushes the president out, and that's going to take us down the road of Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and many of those other failed states. So I think that the good people who share the same values and principles, who want the same things for South Africa, to start to come together and have a discussion about, right, we're in trouble. Let's stop pointing fingers about why we got here. That's fine. Let's acknowledge we're in trouble. What are the next best steps that we can make to get out of trouble? And spend the next decade doing that. South Africa needs a golden decade of growth, economic growth. And so let's put all these other, crazy plans, let's put them aside. Expropriation without compensation, NHI, prescribed assets. Let's park them for the time being. You as a party, you can come back to them at any time you want after. But let's get the economy growing 6-8%. Let's get South Africans into work. Let's provide a quality education. Let's reform our labor legislation so that we can stimulate a jobs revolution in South Africa. Let's provide a platform where no student who qualifies doesn't get into a tertiary institution. Let's focus on providing quality basic education for our children. Let's focus on service delivery so people can live in dignity. I think if we can, and let's build a capable state that is able to underpin all of this. I think we can do that. What happens after that, parties can go their own way and fight their way out of it. But we are in a major crisis, a crisis that our generation has not yet seen economically. And there's going to be tough times ahead for South Africa, and it's going to require all the talents to come together to get us out of this particular situation.
Meg mentioned that turning this proverbial ship around will start at local government elections. Now, if you look at the Western Cape, if you look at Khayelitsha, for instance, and generally in this space that we're in, nobody points out the good points. Everybody will point out the sore points and the red flags. In terms of the local government or local governance within the Western Cape in particular, where can you improve, and where could you mirror certain things that you've already done within the other local governments throughout the country?
Yeah. Look, let me be upfront and honest right from the beginning. The Western Cape and Cape Town are not a Garden of Eden. They're not places of perfection. We govern there and we get things wrong. We make mistakes. And that's it happens. It happens in government. But I think if you look at government's own metrics and certainly all the benchmarking ratings, Africa, etc., Cape Town is the least unequal city in the country. Buffalo City is actually the most unequal. It is by far got the largest basket of goods to indigent people who live in the city. Basic service delivery is far higher than everywhere else. You've got a greater chance of getting a job and finding access to services. We don't always get it right, though, and we've got a big hill to climb. Apartheid left us with a terrible legacy, and particularly around spatial inequality in a place like the city of Cape Town and the Western Cape is very, very difficult to overcome overnight. And it's not helped with land invasions and the like, because it makes it very difficult to roll out programs and projects in a meaningful way. And so I think we've got to focus more on talking up the good that the city's doing. We get a really hard time from people who say that the homeless are given a terrible time in Cape Town. Well, I spent Nelson Mandela Day visiting some of the city's projects for homelessness. There's a great Kulenborg safety centre in the centre of town, which provides accommodation, 3 meals a day, access to health services, as well as sitting with a social worker to develop a personal plan to get out of there and off the streets and into a job. The city spends 70 million rand a year on dealing with the issue of homelessness and trying to get people off the streets. No other city in the country has social workers going out every day, developing profiles of homeless people and trying to get them off the streets and into shelters. And the same can be said with the eviction that we saw in terms of that gentleman in the shack who was having a bath. I mean, that sort of thing is not acceptable. You've got to always treat people as a government and in as humane a way as possible and in a way in which affords them dignity. So those sorts of things really don't help the narrative that is developed by our opponents. And so we've just got to govern better and I think be a lot more assertive in talking about our successes, which are significant. And I'm very proud of a lot of the work that happens in the city of Cape Town and in the Western Cape. And I think it shows that with the right attitude, with the right people, and with the right values and ethics in government, you can run a capable state. You can run a place where the economy is growing, where you're able to provide services, where the money goes to the people and not the politicians. And I think that's very, very important. And, the latest example is this huge PPE scandal around the country. Western Cape is the only province that has published a full list.
We lost him. Oh, he's back. He's back. Okay.
Hello?
I don't know what happened there. Are you still there?
Yes, we are. You were still explaining about the PPE. I mean, the list of I guess service providers in the Western Cape. You disappeared for a bit. Now you're back.
So, I mean, we're the only government that's provided a full list of every single PPE tender in the country. And you imagine if every other government in the country was doing that, you'd be able to avoid many of these problems that we're facing.
So what I wanted to ask you is, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think that let's call a spade here. For the Democratic Alliance then to find itself in the position of a 50+1 majority in South Africa, you would need to attract black voters. And my question is really targeted and direct. What is it that the DA can offer black voters, taking into account that they're a diverse group in themselves? Buhle and I are sitting in green leafy suburbia in Johannesburg, but we have relatives, for example, who live in huts who do not have flushing toilets, whilst we have other relatives who are living in townships and they have to deal with high density living, crime, and a whole litany of other things. So ultimately, for the black voter, what is it that you can tell us today where any one of those black voters can sit down and say, what is in it for me and what am I going to gain out of my vote with the Democratic Alliance?
Well, I'd say there's 3 key things that we would be able to guarantee those voters, and it's as simple as ABC. The first is access to opportunity, access to better services, access to a quality education, access to housing opportunities, and access to a government that is actually proactive about what it does. B, better government by building a capable state, building capable municipalities that are able to deliver services efficiently and effectively, spending the money on citizens, not on government, and ensuring that everyone has access to the basic dignity that's required of water, electricity, and sewerage, and making sure that we give people the government they deserve. And the third is caring. C, we care about the A's and the B's because it makes such a difference in people's lives. You can stay as you are for the rest of your life, or you can use your vote to change your circumstances. And that is the key message. And, we don't just talk about the capable state, we've delivered it. We don't talk about access to opportunity and a decent education. It's delivered where we govern. We don't talk about better services from your municipality. We've delivered them. And we've been able to show through our keeping our school feeding scheme open during the crisis, only one out of 9 provinces to do so, making sure that we're running these programs for homeless people, focusing on ensuring we lift people out of poverty and into opportunity, shows that we care. So it's as simple as that. Your vote is the most powerful tool that you have to be able to change your circumstances. And it's only if you want to change in your circumstances, you've got to change your vote, because doing the same thing over and over again is going to get you the same result. So we can offer a new horizon, new opportunity, and a better life. We don't talk about it, we deliver it.
Now, of course, the DA doesn't, work and function in isolation, especially when you look at Helen Ziller. We know the comments that she's made, that she made on Twitter, and there was an uproar regarding them, which, of course, affects the majority of the country. Those comments about the apartheid laws having been less oppressive than these laws currently under, this lockdown that we're in. In terms of looking past just these laws in particular, looking at things like triple BE and those sort of reforms that have been put into place, where does the DA stand in regards to those, and how would you rather redress the certain reforms that we are currently busy with in this country?
Great. So again, triple BEE is a good example of a well-intended government policy that has had precisely the opposite effect to what it was meant to do. There's nothing broad-based or economically empowering about it, no matter how you look at it. Truth of the matter is, since those policies have been used, black households are 10% poorer. Unemployment amongst black South Africans has risen from 3.4 million to around about just under 10 million. And life has got a lot harder for citizens. So there's been nothing broad-based or economically empowering about it. It has enriched a very small elite of people and left the 30 million languishing in poverty and locked out of opportunity. So we've got to have empowerment policies in South Africa, because you can't say you're going to have the Comrades Marathon and you have half the runners starting in Hillcrest and the others in Durban, and then you get to the end, the finish line, and you say you've had a fair race. We've got to try and get everybody onto the same starting line. But government's approaching it from the wrong way. The best way of empowering people is a job, a quality education, a safe neighborhood, and an ability for children to be able to access quality tertiary education so that they're able to upskill themselves to compete in the modern world. And I think government has focused so much on the triple BEE aspect of it that they haven't focused nearly as much on the opportunity levers that a government has at its disposal to really make a meaningful difference in people's lives. You look at countries around the world, they've turned it around through focusing on education, on making sure that citizens are safe in their communities, by making sure people have got access to quality public health care. These are levers that government has completely neglected over the last 10 years and has focused on the triple BEE aspect, and in the process has led to price gouging, opportunism, corruption, and maladministration. So it may have been a well-intended program, and I really do believe government did go into it with good intentions. But you've got to judge policies on their outcomes. And anybody who assesses the outcomes of triple BEE cannot possibly look at, this is what we intended, this is what we've ended up with, and be proud of what has happened at the end. And I really think that's why we need a complete rethink and to focus the empowerment model on people who need our assistance. The 30 million people who are trapped in poverty, 97% of whom are black South Africans, mainly under the age of 45. That's where we've got to focus our empowerment policies and our opportunity policies. And if government's not going to get serious about the opportunity levers, you're never going to get the empowerment levers right as well.
This is my final question, and I'll end on this one. I mean, speaking to what Buhle had raised, and I really, again, thank you for taking the time for sitting down and chatting to us this morning, and for clearly articulating where you stand and politically what informs you, etc., what your vision for this country is. But I think juxtaposed to that, and sadly enough, it's just a reality that you're faced with, is going back to the tweets that Buhle had mentioned, coming through from your federal chairperson being Helen Zille. A lot of people get turned off, quite frankly, by those types of comments. A lot of people say that it is in direct opposition to what you pitched to us for almost an hour now. How do you deal with that beyond just the internal disciplinary process? Is there, and maybe this is a very personal question, I mean, is there a moment where you sit down with her and say, Mrs. Zille or Ms. Zille, this is not the way to do things?
That is absolutely the way you deal with it as a leader. You deal with your colleagues directly and straight. And John Kennedy famously said that one of the greatest attributes of a leader is being able to stand up to one's own associates. I had those meetings with Mrs. Zille. They weren't comfortable. And I said to her, I fundamentally disagreed. I said publicly, I disagreed. I happen to think that the very worst day in the new South Africa is better than the very best day prior to democracy. And I honestly believe that with all my heart. And that you can't equate an evil system that is being declared a crime against humanity with a government that is just completely incapable of getting the most basics right. And I made that point very clear to her. I also indicated to her that Twitter is not the platform. Let me tell you about Helen Zille. Helen Zille is not a racist. Helen Zille is probably one of the most progressive individuals I've ever met in South Africa, who clearly and absolutely does not see race as an impediment or judgment on any individual. Now, she's also been the most successful premier in post-democratic South Africa, and she's, as I said, delivered the capable state. Now, you want someone like that's feet under the table when you're making decisions. You don't want their fingers on Twitter. And so we have reached an agreement that she is exiting Twitter. She's handed her logins over to a staff member and will focus on her job, which is fixing the internal environment within the party in terms of the review panel report, and to leave the politics to the politicians. And leaders have to be able to have those straight conversations with their colleagues. I've had those conversations. I just wish we had a president who could do the same with his colleagues.
Well, thank you for your time.
Great chatting, guys. Keep well, and hope to see you again soon, and good luck with the new venture.